Jane Velez Mitchell, Jane Unchained, with one of my heroes, David Coman Heidi of the Humane League. He is the president of this incredible organization. Thank you for joining us. I know you're very busy doing so much. I took a deep dive into your website, and your accomplishments and your team's accomplishments are extraordinary. So let me start out by asking you, David, how are you navigating these turbulent times? We've got the uprisings against racism, protests happening coast to coast. We have the coronavirus pandemic. And let's not forget, climate change continues its march toward a potential apocalypse if we don't do something about it. What's the Humane League doing to navigate all this?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jane, and great question. I guess I'll answer in three parts. So, to start addressing the most recent news, I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about animal rights during this talk, but I just want to invite everybody watching to get involved now and participate in the Black Lives Matter movement. There's a tremendous opportunity for change that exists right now, and I'm sure everybody on the stream does not consider themselves a racist, dislikes racism, but that is no longer enough. It has not been enough, and we need to move into anti-racism. And when it comes to the animal movement, I think that's particularly true of the larger groups, including the Humane League, which have been historically very white-led. We haven't done close to enough to address racism, particularly anti-Black racism, both in the movement and at large. And for the current moment, to answer your question, we've been trying to amplify Black voices and do what we can on social media with our platforms and so forth. But ultimately, the real change is that this is a long-term project, and we need to dedicate ourselves to it. So, our fellow animal people, Jane, you often hear kind of sour grapes about our cause not being taken seriously as an issue of justice or politics or of nonviolence. But we need to live up to our own standards here. And if we're morally serious people, we can't simply be on the sidelines right now. So at THL, we've given our staff a lot of latitude to get involved. We took a day off for education last week. We have a mostly white staff in the US, and a big first step is making sure everyone's really educated on these issues. And I just came from a meeting where we've been discussing what our longer term plans are, how we can help the movement improve in this area. So that's how we've been reacting to that, the first of the three crises you mentioned.
Well, I want to jump in with some of the things you have accomplished last year at the National Animal Rights Conference. As it wrapped up, you led an incredible demonstration outside of McDonald's. I want to play that demonstration because Jane Unchained was there going live, and it was huge. And then talk to you about what's happened since then. So let's check that out.
In 3, 2. Hey everybody, we are out here with over 140 activists at a McDonald's in Alexandria, Virginia, to protest the extreme animal cruelty that chickens and McDonald's supply chain face. And so we're out here to speak up and ask McDonald's to commit to switching to a healthier breed of chicken to address these major welfare concerns. We're also asking that McDonald's provide these birds with more space. Currently, they're crammed together. Given their size, they don't move around very much. They lie in their own waste to the point where they actually have chemical burns through their skin due to the ammonia-rich environment. So we're asking McDonald's to provide more space for these birds to move around, to exhibit their natural behaviors. We're asking that McDonald's commits to real and firm environmental enrichments. Here we're talking about things like natural light and perches.
These folks have been attending the National Animal Rights Conference in the DC area, but they come from all over the United States and the world, and they are standing as one to say that the posture that McDonald's has taken on animal welfare is unacceptable, and that it is a company that is drenched in cruelty. And so what they are saying is that animals deserve better.
Would you care to share why you're out here today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here today because the chickens raised for meat in McDonald's supply chain are bred to grow so large, so fast, that the animals suffer immensely under the crippling weight of their own bodies.
So first, I want to say that McDonald's or any other corporation involved in industrialized animal agriculture is invited on Jane Unchained anytime. And we did include a link to McDonald's statement on animal welfare, which is very lengthy, but essentially says that it treats animals very well and acknowledges the 5 freedoms: freedom from hunger, thirst, pain, injury, disease, and to express normal behavior, and from fear and distress. So tell us, David, that was a very powerful demonstration, very well organized. And one thing I'll say about Humane League, very well organized. What has happened in the years since?
So we've been working broadly on this campaign to improve the lives of chickens raised and killed for meat, called broiler chickens, by the industry for several years now, including this kind of flagship campaign against McDonald's. And as of today, over 170 major corporations have signed on to fully implement the changes that this coalition of animal groups have been asking for. So that includes groups like Burger King, Chipotle, General Mills, Denny's, Unilever, Starbucks, making pretty sweeping changes to their supply chain, influencing companies like, say, Tyson Foods that have been in the news quite a lot recently. So the biggest substantive change that we've seen come from this as of a few weeks ago is Tyson putting out their own sustainability commitment, where we see that they're ending live shackling slaughter systems in 4 of their slaughterhouses. This is going to impact several 100 million birds every year. This similar campaign running in the UK has now already changed 5% of all chicken that's produced in the country. And what that means is that 30 million birds every year are not going to have to suffer in the same way. And that means together, these changes are impacting 1/3 of a billion birds every year. So while incremental change can be frustratingly slow, we're already seeing pretty major strides being taken by some of these corporations, thanks to the grassroots advocates that you saw in that video and the folks like them around the world.
And David, I want to ask you a provocative question, because there are those who say, why try to make something better that they feel is morally reprehensible? And frankly, if you look at factory farm footage in general, there are billions of animals trapped in what they call farms, but they're mostly concentrated animal feeding operations, which are warehouses. They don't see the sky, they don't touch grass. What do you say to people who say, don't try to improve it, just try to end it?
Yeah, well, it's a question I can really sympathize with, Jane. I mean, I imagine that the folks who might be thinking that when they hear about our campaigns, let's say, I probably disagree with them much less than they might imagine. I think, first there's a question of principle, and on that we can be unequivocal. Animal abuse is wrong, the killing of animals is wrong, the senseless brutality of factory farming is a moral abomination. We both would want a world where chickens and pigs and fishes and cows are not born into a system of abuse and death. But then there's the matter of how do we get to that world that we both want to see, that all of us want to see that are working in this movement. And that's a question of strategy. And when I look at the situation that we're in, I see 2 important reasons to fight for reform. The first is that there are tens of billions of animals being raised and killed for food all around the world every year. And we know that we can substantively reduce the suffering that those beings are going to be born into, that we can actually make real substantive changes in their lives, getting them out of cages, ending things like live shackling and water bath stunning and slaughter. And if I were in the shoes of the animals, if myself or a loved one were in that position, these are the same kind of reforms that I would be fighting for if I knew I could make those changes in their lives. But more importantly, and this goes to the broader question of the world we want to get to, is that these incremental wins, they help build the power and influence of our movement. The strongest animal protection laws that exist, and let's not forget what the meaning of animal rights is. These are laws protecting animals. The strongest animal protection laws that exist are the ballot initiatives in California and Massachusetts and other state laws that ban intensive confinement, that ban the sale of animal products from intensive confinement. The laws like this around the world, that's kind of the bleeding edge right now of animal rights in terms of actual laws passed, and real points up on the scoreboard. And we're building a movement, we're building capacity and power, like durable systems of power and organizations and leaders within the movement who can replicate and build on these successes. And it's actually, you know, it's funny, but it's precisely because I identify as an abolitionist, because I identify as someone who wants to abolish the system of factory farming, who wants to end the killing of animals for food, that I feel a moral urgency to not act in a way that I find gratifying or simply to speak truth to power, but focus as many resources in a way that I deem to be effective and strategic based on the research we have available to us, modeling after other successful movements that have come before us, all of which have built their ultimate goals on a series of incremental wins. So the kind of corporate campaigns and asks we're doing right now, this isn't the end game. This isn't the total strategy of organizations like the Humane League, of our movement. But I think it's an important piece of the puzzle right now to start creating real reforms on farms and starting to flex a little political muscle.
Yeah, and you know, you're absolutely right that we've made some major breakthroughs. We can talk about some of them, but this is a headline from the New York Times, which is the furthest thing from an animal rights publication. But here, the end of meat is here. If you care about the working poor, about racial justice, and about climate change, you have to stop eating animals. A brilliant article by the amazing author Jonathan Safran Foer. And those are just some of the examples of issues that we've been talking about for 20 years, finally getting into the mainstream. And speaking of McDonald's, look, McDonald's expands Beyond Meat plant-based burger trials in Canada. This was an article from the first of the year. We know that many of the other fast food giants, Burger King and Dunkin' Donuts and White Castle, and I could go on, have introduced plant-based options. And McDonald's is the biggie, testing now. I don't know exactly where it stands, but there are breakthroughs happening on that front. Now, I want to point out that you focus a lot on chickens, and you made a campaign specific to chickens. And I have a video because so many chickens and hens are being depopulated right now, which is a fancy word for just mass killing. And when they use the word euthanasia, don't buy it. They're some of the worst video I've ever seen in my life, and I've been doing this for 40 years, is the depopulation, the so-called euthanasia of these animals. I'll just show you a couple of headlines that we have people talking about having to depopulate because the slaughterhouses are hotbeds of coronavirus infection. Some of them have had to close down, so the farmers have to depopulate their animals. So there were a small number of animals, relative small number, I think it was approximately 1,000, that were rescued, I should say, by a great organization called Animal Place. They were taken from a factory farm that was about to depopulate, and they were rescued and brought to a sanctuary. I want you to meet these chickens before we discuss why you focus so much on chickens. These are the chickens who have been freed from the factory farming, industrialized animal system where they are treated as if they are just units of production. And this is how they adjusted almost immediately to their new life. All right. So tell us why you focus in on chickens, and why sometimes I think people think of chickens as almost non-beings, but that they are indeed beings with individual personalities, each and every one of them.
Yeah. So I think that video illustrates perfectly exactly what you're getting at, that each one of these chickens is an individual who does not want to experience suffering, that doesn't want to be born into a system of abuse, and it's always a good reminder of who we're fighting for out there. The reason that we do focus so much on chickens at the Humane League is really the numbers. The vast majority of land animals who are raised and killed for food are those chickens raised and killed for meat, the broiler chickens. And then there's, on top of that, in the US, over 300 million more egg-laying hens. So if we're serious about making an impact for a large number of animals, reducing the number of chickens being born onto factory farms and also improving the conditions for those birds are two really effective ways to do that. And another good reason to focus on chickens right now is that we actually see a path forward on making substantive changes. Like the two laws that I mentioned before exist to protect chickens. The chickens are by far the animals most impacted by those laws, banning battery cages, for example. Additionally, we see a movement around the world working with the Open Wing Alliance that the Humane League helps organize, fighting to get cages gone from the face of the earth. And finally, substantive changes for broiler chickens as well, which I mentioned before. So I think it's those two reasons that we see a kind of like strategic sweet spot where we can really influence a large number of animals in a way that is meaningful towards their suffering. We can help elevate the issue of animal welfare and animal suffering and animal rights through those campaigns. And it's something that's achievable and tractable. We're not just throwing something at the wall and seeing what sticks. There's a real strategy that we can pursue effectively.
Now, because of the slaughterhouses closing down, there is a lot of talk about slaughterhouses, which, you know, I think a lot of people would like to pretend that their meat hamburgers and their chicken wings just fell off a tree, and they don't want to come to terms with what they're doing. Farmers are now having to come to terms with what they're doing. They can't just wave their farm animal goodbye and let them go off on a truck. Some of them are having to kill their animals by the tens of thousands, and that is waking them up to the horror that is involved. And now with constant talk about slaughterhouses being one of the hotbeds of the coronavirus infection, not just here in the United States, but globally. They're infected globally. A lot of people are thinking about slaughterhouses. And in fact, we have LULAC, the nation's largest civil rights organization, calling for a meat boycott. You have PETA, for example, putting full-page ads in papers across the country saying it's time to move away from meat. And you even have Cory Booker and Elizabeth Warren proposing a bill to wipe out factory farming by 2040. So I wanted to ask you if you think that we are at the potential tipping point now, or where are we? What's the big picture as to where our movement is right now?
Yeah, that's a really tough question to answer, and I'm of a few minds about it. I think on one hand, I would say, particularly for maybe advocates who are relatively new to the cause or to the movement, that I can sincerely say there's been no better time to get involved. That, you know, we're seeing the movement grow, both in terms of the number of people involved, the number of resources available to us, the scope internationally, the number of groups that are working in new areas where previously there were not animal rights organizations. And we're starting to see laws being passed. We're starting to see corporate commitments. We're seeing huge groundswells of just true grassroots movements popping up around the world. So all of this is tremendously heartening, in addition to some of the meat alternative work that you mentioned before. So these are all extremely exciting things. On the other hand, I think, given the situation of power asymmetry that we're in, where the animal movement is still very small compared to our enemies, compared to the industries who are killing animals, that it's also incumbent on us to be very sober about what our strategic position is, so that we make sure not to fool ourselves and to leverage every advantage that we can. And for example, so here's a great example that you brought up is Cory Booker's bill to, you know, essentially end much of factory farming in the U.S. Now, on one hand, it's quite exciting that this bill exists and that a national politician who's so prominent wants to talk about this issue. And similarly, Julian Castro, for example, putting out a statement on his position on animal rights and factory farming. This is incredibly good as well. We've seen some progress even beyond this in the UK. On the other, so that's positive, but we must also hold at the same time that the animal movement really does not have much of a political organizing base yet. We don't have any real durable institutions of political change beyond the good work of a few groups who are able to pass laws state by state every now and then. We don't have anything close to imagine what it would be like to have, for example, something like the NRA, but focused on pushing for animal rights. So I don't want us to lose sight of where we need to get. We need to have a large, in the US I'm talking here, national push to get more involved in politics, to get our issue on the table in a substantive way. So it's true, we're starting to see a little bit of cracks in the edifice right now, and that's quite exciting. But we have a really long way to go. So I guess I'm an optimist and a pessimist at the same time on this.
Yes, absolutely. We can't be Pollyanna and just celebrating when billions of animals are still being killed. And because chickens are the vast majority of the animals killed, unfortunately, the numbers are going up, which is disheartening. I remember I was at a hotel and I just was checking in, and this very nice lady was trying to promote her restaurant in the hotel, and she was saying, we have this, we have that, we have wings, we have wings, we have wings. And I went up to her and I said, when you say we have wings, those are the wings of chickens that belong to those chickens. You seem very disassociated from what you're selling. I just wanted to point that out. And she looked at me like in shock, like it literally, like it was a thought that had never occurred to her. And she said, well, I eat meat, and turned on her heels and walked away. But I think it's that disassociation. I remember, this is a little kooky, but I was in a yoga class, and the woman said, spread like chicken wings, spread out like chicken wings. And I went up to her afterwards and I said, I just want to clarify, did you say spread your arms like a chicken's wings, which would be beautiful, or were you thinking spread out like chicken wings? And, again, it was trying to sort of interrupt the blindness that people have about what they're really talking about. They're talking about animals, individuals who are killed. I just really wonder when that breakthrough is going to occur. And I do feel what's happening right now with the slaughterhouses, where people are seeing slaughterhouses, they're seeing the slaughterhouse assembly line, which some of them have never seen. And that is actually forcing people to come to terms. Farmers who are also, I believe, victims, many of them, of the system. They're put in onerous loans. They're essentially indentured servants with an overlord of the meat processors. There's only 5 big ones, approximately. 2 of them aren't even American-owned. One's Chinese-owned, one's Brazilian-owned. But I think that slowly people are starting to come out of their fog. And that's my final question to you. Do you see that happening?
Well, I think I would say during COVID-19 in particular, the front page news every day on publications like the New York Times, covering exactly like you say, what's happening inside of these slaughter facilities and meatpacking plants and so forth that are typically so hidden from public view. The fact that Trump put out an executive order on the topic, that we're seeing high profile op-eds being published. I think that this is obviously very positive for awareness around our issue, that it's being talked about in a serious way, that it's being seen as a serious issue that elites are talking about, for example, in these newspapers. But I don't think that we should fool ourselves in that this is going to be like a tremendous tipping point. Instead, it's an opportunity for advocates to get involved, to both speak to people in their personal lives who may be engaging with this content, but more importantly, to start building the structures that can make real change. So this means getting involved in local advocacy work, volunteering with organizations, donating with organizations. I'll say towards the end of this now that I highly recommend people go to fastactionnetwork.com. It's an easy way to volunteer online on all of our advocacy campaigns. It's a perfect fit for quarantine activism. We just updated the platform. It's never been easier to get involved. And it's, yeah, I do think that there is a real opportunity right now where our issue is starting to have its moment, where there is a certain level of consciousness around this as a serious issue that's happening. But it's up to people like us, like the people watching this stream right now, to take advantage of it, to make something of it, because without folks like us doing the work, it's just going to be another news cycle very shortly.
Well, I just want to say, David, it's been great talking to you. Really impressed by your work. Of course, I've known about your organization for years, but when you're about to do an interview, you do some research, and the accomplishments that you've laid out on your website, the humaneleague.org, are really extraordinary. So I just want to thank you for everything you do for animals, people, on the planet. Carry on, and everybody check out the Humane League and get involved. And just by the way, they have great parties too.
Hell yeah. All right. Thank you, Jen.
All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.